Welcome back. We're back with your news at Primary Report. By statistics, South Africa has laid bare the devastation the tourism industry has endured during the COVID-19 lockdown. The data painted a bleak picture of the sharp decrease in the number of tourists visiting South Africa in December 2020, and as a result, loss of income for the tourist accommodation industry. Now, the income for the industry decreased by 57.7% in December 2020 compared to the previous year. To get more perspective on this, we're joined now by Sisa Nchona, Chief Executive Officer for South African Tourism. Sisa, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. Hardly a surprise, I suppose, that there has been no significant tourism business in the country since the onset of the pandemic.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, absolutely. It's we are fast heading towards the anniversary, a year later, essentially, when we went into lockdown. Tourism globally, worldwide, has really been hit hard. And, we're still not getting as much reprieve as we thought we would. You're absolutely right. December was a bloodbath. We expected more from it. But I think when the president announced a high lockdown, closure of beaches, and also the banning of the selling of alcohol, that really pulled the sector back in what we thought would be kind of a good bounce back.
How complicated is the situation? I mean, especially being made more complex, I suppose, by the fact that hotels have closed down during that period. Some attractions have also shut down with no hope of actually reopening. Airline business is also not that great at this particular point in time.
Yeah, you got to look at the entire value chain, all transportation modes getting you to destinations, the hotels themselves, and also any tourism activities. Look, I think we're really struggling quite a lot on the inner city hotels, those that rely on corporate, business, that rely on government business and conferencing. I mean, that's a very big part of our business. And essentially, that's really come to a halt, So you'll see a lot of inner city hotels not having any movement. Where we've seen some action, as it were, is more on the leisure side. Those ones that either have a mountain, a beach, or a bush, essentially, are picking up, especially over weekends. As a result, that many South Africans used to travel overseas are no longer able to travel overseas, and we repurpose them for internal consumption. But there is movement. It's not enough, but we are grateful for what we can get, as it were.
Now, it's a three-pronged kind of recovery. Firstly, you're looking at hyperlocal community attraction, and that is the domestic market, but also looking at the regional market. And then later on, we will be obviously seeing the worldwide opening. So at this particular point, what are you doing to invoke some kind of demand domestically?
Yeah, it is absolutely right that travel is becoming more of a confidence issue. And you start off exploring your immediate surrounds, and the more confident you get, your circumference gets wider and wider and wider, essentially. So again, for the foreseeable future, we have to take care of ourselves. And what we've really been pushing through our short left activity is to highlight all of the places, the beautiful places that this country has to show. And you're really encouraging people to go out, into the beaten path, as it were, the villages, the township, and the small dorpies, and rediscover South Africa, from their perspective. And we've seen some really great take-up from South Africans. I think the key message is, want to say to people, travel with the purpose. Because when you travel and you spend your rands in whatever establishments, the money you leave behind acts as a catalyst that actually helps towards economic activity, job creation, and. And we've got to kickstart this economy. The president spoke about localization, and our take of localization is domestic travel. And I think that's our focus for the foreseeable future.
Now, one of the measures of this recovery plan is firstly to protect those who, by some kind of measure, have managed to sustain and hold on and stay on. What are you doing to protect those particular outfits?
Yeah, so in the early stages of the pandemic, we really had what we call the tourism support fund, essentially, and that's really assisting the small, vulnerable SMEs to really hold them together. Then you also have the rollout of the UIF tiers, which actually assist, establishments with making sure they can pay their staff salaries, etc. there. Then there's also the generic government guarantee scheme through the banks, essentially. I think there's a sum of 200 billion rands that people can access there. Now, to be very clear that the most sustainable way of actually keeping the sector alive is enabling full trade with it. You can't aid your way through this. You've got to trade your way through this. Then the difficulty lies then in finding the right timing to be able to open up the sector whilst at the same time getting the activity coming through. Because you don't want to go too big and open up the sector only to regress in terms of the number of cases you have as a country. So it's always trying to walk that very fine line, between, protecting businesses but also enabling, society at large.
Yeah. Are we even talking about rejuvenating supply right now? I mean, there are those suppliers who unfortunately had to shut down.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be quite key, and I'll tell you why, is that you don't want to ignore the supply side, only to find that when you do open up, you don't have a tourism sector to speak of, because it would have been totally demolished, essentially. So you are kind of holding it together whilst you are taking through it, through the storm, as it were. This year is what we call the year of the vaccine. And we're adopting it as the year of the vaccine because the vaccine will give confidence to domestic travelers and also international travelers that South Africa is a safe destination for people to travel to. And I think once we get the right level of prevalence of the vaccine rolled out, we'll start to see some activity happening again.
Yeah. Look, I mean, watching the wires and watching what international news are reporting about South Africa, they say, of course, South Africa dealing with one of the most severe and dangerous variants in the country. We've done well with only 1% of our nation at this point possibly vaccinated. I'm not sure about the 1% if we're even beginning to be at 1% at this point. But the fact of the matter is that there is some kind of a trial that is running. We are not yet at full rollout. How much of a constraint is that for the tourism sector to bounce back?
Oh, it is. It's a big one. I think that's the vaccine rollout rate. Is suddenly now becoming the key element that the sector is looking at in terms of measuring them. We are right. You are right. We're a bit behind on that space, but I think we want to catch up and make sure that South Africa is on par with other destinations around the world in terms of being considered as a safe destination. Key is understanding the changing consumer behavior and changing needs, and they are putting their personal health and safety above everything else there. And if we can assure them that South Africa is a destination that is safe, is a destination as well that can look after them, I think we've got a winning formula. So we really need to ramp up our vaccine rollout and send positive messages out there that South Africa is ready for them.
The target, of course, of some kind of recovery to the 2019 numbers. I mean, here we were talking in 2019, 10.2 million arrivals, 7.1 million in terms of domestic. The target set was 2022. Are you still tied to that target?
Well, it's a moving environment, isn't it? I don't think anyone in the world can actually give you a target. What we can do is to give scenarios as an example, right? So therefore, we know that South Africa right now, we may be heading towards a third wave. We still need to understand the consequence and impact of the third wave as well. The other one is that where we have no control over our source market destination, as it were. So we can be as ready as we want as South Africa. But if US doesn't have the act together, the UK or even Europe as an example, then they will not be able to travel and come to South Africa. So it needs two to tango, as it were, and being able to call it, and when both sides are able to open up, is very, very difficult, because there's just so many things that are unknown.
How far is the conversation going as far as the reviewing of the institutional architecture? Those were some of the recommendations that you made as part of the recovery.
Yeah, I mean, that's well underway, and we're looking at finding smart ways, essentially, of using this time to say, how are we stacked up as the tourism fraternity in South Africa? Is it optimal? Can we do better from the perspective? And looking, across the board and repurposing some of, state-owned entities, as an example, to see how we can bring them together and have a bit more formidable play. We have limited resources. So therefore, we have to be smart with the limited resources we have and apply them accordingly.
As far as your partners in the region are concerned, I mean, what is the conversation? We know that there is that free trade agreement now in place and for the stimulation of regional travel.
Yeah, to a large extent, our success of recovery is linked to our neighbors also, state of recovery. So we're in this together. That South Africa cannot isolate itself from its neighbors and say, we are the only safe one, come to us, don't go to others, as it were. So therefore, it is in our interest to make sure that as we roll out the vaccine, that our neighbors are also doing that as well. So that as a bloc, we become competitive to the world. And I think those are conversations that are going all the time. The things about the free trade agreements, the bilaterals are really going to come down so that you can move from one country to the next without having any hurdles around immigrations and other issues.
Looking forward, how is travel policy going to change? I was listening coming in, for example, things like going forward, we might need to have a vaccination passport, including your normal travel passport. That will be the way of the future.
Yeah, look, I kind of foresee an environment where the world goes back in terms of issuing visas. And this time, they won't be asking, how much money you have in your pocket, but rather where you've traveled, where you've been. They will assess what kind of risk you actually possess to them as well, and then look at mitigating matters. You can't also underestimate, the advancements of technology and digitalization that we'll have on all of this, And again, will we have digital passports? You can almost try to look at what a future hotel looks like. Will there be a lobby, or will I be able to check in, book a room remotely, get to the hotel, just tap my cell phone when I get to the door, and that's it, as an example. So all of this is going to come into play as we reimagine what tourism will look like into the future.
Caesar, good to catch up with you again tonight. Thank you for joining us. That's the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Tourism, Caesar Nshona. Of course, we'll continue with you with your headlines next here on News at Prime.